So first of all, let me welcome you all here. We all know why we are here. We are here today because of the hearing of Commissioner-designate Mr. Schmit, who is our dear colleague. And we might have a great cooperation, but we still need to confirm the start of the cooperation with Mr. Schmit here today at the hearing. First, I should like to recall that in line with the guidelines for the approval of the Commission Annex 7 to the Rules of Procedure, Parliament evaluates Commissioner-designate on the basis of their general competence, European commitment and personal independence. It shall assess knowledge of their respective portfolio and their communication skills. I would also like to recall, before the hearing, the Commissioner-designate replied in written to a written questionnaire. You all should have it. I would briefly like to explain the structure of today's debate. The Commissioner-designate is invited to make an opening statement for no longer than 15 minutes. He will also have up to 5 minutes at the end of the meeting for a closing statement. After the introduction, there will be time for 25 questions from all of you. The debate will be held in accordance with the ping-pong principle with slots of 5 minutes, which means 1 minute for the question and 2 minutes for the answer, 1 minute for a follow-up question by the same member, and 1 minute for the answer. Due to the large number of questions and strict time restrictions, the respect of the speaking time will be ensured very strictly. Please note that. The Ample Committee is the main committee responsible for this hearing. The Econ Committee is associated, and the Cult and FEM committees are invited to the hearing. We all welcome our colleagues from these committees. The first round of questions goes to the political group coordinators, and the second round of questions is based on the overall distribution of questions among the political groups, including also representatives from the non-attached member. Now, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that interpretation will be provided in 23 languages. All speakers can use their own language, and I can only invite them to do so. However, speakers are hereby reminded that what they say will need to be interpreted, and that they should therefore not speak too quickly for our interpreters. And finally, I would like to inform you that the debate will be streamed live on the parliamentary website, and that it will be possible to access a video recording of the hearing in the same website. Now, let me just get to a brief introduction of not about Mr. Schmit, but more his portfolio. I think it's very, very ambitious, all the plan that we heard from Madame Ursula von der Leyen. What I would like to stress out is the European pillar of social rights, the implementation, and then, of course, the child guarantee, which I do hope that will protect the most vulnerable of our citizens, the children, especially from the ethnic minorities and socially excluded communities. And as a Slovak, please allow me to express my strong hope that the European Labour Authority will quickly become operational at its seats in Bratislava, because we strongly needed to implement the coordination of the social systems. And now, please, Mr. Schmit, the floor is yours. You have your 15 minutes.
Madame la Présidente, Madam Chair, members of Parliament, it's a great honour for me to be here before you for this hearing. The task and mission given to me, if confirmed, will give me an opportunity to work together with you. My track record in politics and professional life shows my commitment to the European project. I've had the honour of participating in some of the key moments of Europe's construction, and it's allowed Europe to regenerate and to allow successive generations of young people to enjoy peace and prosperity. Europe is first and foremost founded on values, fundamental rights, which are embedded in our daily lives. We are determined, just as it says in the treaty's preamble, to promote economic and social progress of our peoples. And it's the social market economy within a competitive environment, as described in Article 3, that I am committed to. The European model and its strength is all about reconciling economic and social dimensions without forgetting the environmental dimension. I would like to refer to Jacques Delors' 2016 statement when he said that if we have cohesion and without sacrifice, we cannot support the needs of European citizens. No chance whatsoever. So today, more than ever before, we need to get citizens' trust, earn citizens' trust and confidence. The social dimension is an embodiment of a Europe that protects, and it's an essential part of the puzzle. And I hereby make a formal commitment to listen, to promote dialogue. And allow me to switch to English.
Commissioner, I will pursue two main goals. Firstly, to boost employment, to promote a well-skilled workforce, responsive to the digital and climate transition ahead of us. Secondly, together with jobs, I will put at the center of my priorities social rights for all and social inclusion. I will pursue high standards on the European labour market, as we need to achieve upward convergence in our living and working conditions. I will promote a European labour market that guarantees access and good opportunities for everybody, and in particularly for persons with disabilities, migrants, Roma communities, and the most deprived. I will do my utmost to fight poverty, to break the poverty cycle affecting children, and to improve the support to youth. I will work to promote a fairer Europe. In a sustainable economy, social rights have a central place. Together with Executive Vice President designate Valdis Dombrovskis, I will ensure the mainstreaming and strengthening the social dimension based on the European Pillar of Social Rights. I will closely and regularly, with the European Parliament, the Member States, social partners, and all stakeholders, to pursue a fairer, more social and inclusive Europe. The European Pillar of Social Rights is a joint political commitment of the three institutions. In close cooperation with Parliament, I will develop an action plan to implement the pillar, both at the Union level and in each Member State, building on the achievements made under the Commission of President Juncker and on the political guidelines of President-elect von der Leyen. 241 million people are currently in employment in the EU, a record high. The unemployment rate in the EU continues to decline, although not in all member states and not in all regions. Not everybody benefits from this positive development. We must ensure that work pays and that it provides a decent living. I will put forward a legal instrument to ensure that every worker in our union has a fair minimum wage. It is not about setting one single EU wage level, and I will pay particular attention to social models of different member states. Jointly, we need to act on equality of opportunity. We need to ensure that men and women feel confident about their future, the future of their families, and the future of their children. To address these challenges, I will reinforce the Youth Guarantee and will lead the work to develop a European child guarantee. Gender balance and gender equality are central to my vision on jobs and social rights. I will closely with the new Commission for Equality to close the gender pay and pension gap, propose binding pay transparency measures, and fully implement the Work-Life Balance Directive for the benefit of both women and men. Many of our citizens are preoccupied by the deepening inequalities, adequate social protection and pension systems, an inclusive labour market with fair wages, and supporting active ageing, career transitions, and investing in social services will be important to fight poverty and to ensure social inclusion. Here, the social economy can play an important role, particularly in local communities, by generating social return. One of the areas I personally care much about is health and safety at work. It is not acceptable that in 2019, people in Europe are still at risk at their workplace. I will promote the adoption of further measures against carcinogens in the workplace. The changing world of work requires new reflections on occupational health and safety. Commissioner for Jobs also means Commissioner for Free Movement of Workers. This is not only a fundamental part of the internal market, but it is also considered by EU citizens as one of the EU's most important achievements. However, recent years have shown us that labour mobility also bears a number of challenges, be it social dumping or brain drain. But we should indeed resist and attempt to limit the opportunity for EU citizens to move freely within the EU. We should rather tackle the underlying issues. Here, the newly created European Labour Authority can play an important role, ensuring cooperation between national authorities, namely carrying out joint inspections. From the discussion in this committee last week, I know that the practical setup of the European Labour Authority is an important issue for many of you. I assure you that it will be rapidly put into place and provided with the adequate means to fulfill its tasks. The Union is challenged in a globalized world by big transformations, economic, technological, environmental, and demographic. People need to be accompanied in the upcoming transitions, enabling them to keep their skills updated as the economy evolves. This requires investment as well as a coherent skills policy with improved tools to accompany all career transitions at all ages. I will explore the idea of individual learning accounts for people of working age. Our labour markets will be changing due to automation, digitalization, and artificial intelligence. We have to engage decisively to mitigate the risks, shape the transitions, and seize the opportunities. It is crucial to ensure trust in the digital future. Therefore, we need to address the labour conditions of platform workers and actively address new forms of precariousness. We all remember the financial crisis and the effects it had on citizens and businesses. We need to be ready to meet future downturns and ensure that the Union is prepared to react in a socially responsible manner to future shocks. The resilience of the economic and monetary union depends on stabilization functions. A future European unemployment benefit reinsurance scheme requires a careful design to ensure rapid responses to shocks while preserving adequate unemployment protection. Social and environmental sustainability are two faces of the same coin. Decent work, quality education, reduced poverty and inequality need to be at the center of a European semester that is refocused on the Sustainable Development Goals. Our international actions need to support a decent work agenda for all. I will work with my colleagues to ensure that international labour standards are put at the core of our trade agreements and in our multilateral work. Investment in people needs to be recognised as an investment in a better future. The European Social Fund Plus is the Union's prime instrument. It is a tool to support the implementation of the principles of the pillar by providing resources. The transition towards a carbon-neutral economy will not be social by default. We have to ensure nobody, no region, no country is left behind. To achieve this objective, the ESF Plus, the European Globalization Adjustment Fund, InvestEU, and the new Just Transition Fund need to be robust enough. A strong social Europe needs social legislation, which is up to date, properly implemented and enforced. It requires social to remain at the core of economic policy coordination under the European semester, a more efficient and simpler use of the European funds, and a permanent and constructive dialogue with social partners and the civil society. Social dialogue should be promoted at all levels, as the Union's social dialogue can only work when built on strong, autonomous national social partners. Likewise, collective bargaining should also be supported, as it constitutes an important feature of our social market economy. As Commissioner, I will fully engage in a dialogue both with the European Parliament and the Council, but also with national parliaments and national social partners. This way we can develop balanced, effective and proportionate initiatives, which are in full respect of subsidiarity. More than ever, facts need to drive our discussion. My work will be based on thorough analysis and impact assessment of our initiatives, drawing on inspiration also beyond the European Union, from our partners in the G7 and the G20, and working with international organizations like the ILO and the OECD. Liebe Frau Präsidentin,
Madam President, Madam Chair, colleagues, the Commission President has given us a very clear message and a clear task and objective, a union that can achieve more. This morning I have come to you with an ambitious programme. Yet my list is not complete. In a changing world, we need to adapt. And so I will listen to your comments, your ideas, your objections. And I can assure you that over the next few years I will be committed to close cooperation with this House. We must work together if we wish to earn the trust of workers, families and citizens, and to reinforce their trust in us and the institutions. Europe is by far the best place in the world to live and work, and it's my objective to make a contribution to keeping it that way. We together are strong enough to shape our future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for introduction of all of your ambitions plans and also for the timing. Before I give the floor to coordinators for the first round of questions, let me please announce you that it's Madame Anne Sanders' birthday today, so congratulations. And now we'll get to the first round of questions that will be held by coordinators, and you know about the 5-minute slots and about the procedure. So first we will get started with Mr. Radke from EPP.
Vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende, lieber Kollege Schmidt, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Thank you very much, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The market economy is the principle on which the European market is based. This is something which has surprised a lot of people still, although it is actually in the treaties of the European Union. I think a lot of people need to read the treaties. But the social market economy can only be a social market economy if we have a functioning social partnership. And in a lot of member states, we're seeing a situation where the partnership between the social partners doesn't work anymore. In a number of member states, we're seeing that this is something which is completely foreign to the governments. And over the last years, at European level, we've seen a situation where social dialogue has gone dormant in a number of areas, which inter alia means that we as a European Parliament were almost forced to do something about transparent and reliable working conditions during the last term of office because the social partners weren't able to agree. So a very specific question. How does the European Commission, how do you intend over the next 5 years to tackle the issue of the social partners? How are you going to strengthen the social partners and how are you going to breathe life into the social market economy? Thank you.
Analyse, ich glaube.
I share your analysis. I think the social model of Europe is a model which is based on the partnership between the social partners and the social market. And without strong social partners, this social market economy can't work the way it's been supposed to work and the way it has worked very successfully in a number of countries over a number of years. And the objective being really to have prosperity for everybody, welfare for everyone. It was the slogan in one country, which was sort of the inventor of the social market economy. Late developments are that there's been a weakening of the social partners, both the employers and the trade unions in the member states. And in this climate of social change, we have to make sure that we strengthen the social partners. The Commission has the possibility of doing this. With our institution building, we have a number of possibilities, including financial possibilities, and they must be invested in those countries where social partnership is almost unknown. So we really need to use these funds and means in a consistent fashion. I think social dialogue is essential, and the social partners must be aware that it is in their interest to be involved in building this social dialogue. Social dialogue and successful social dialogue is important to everybody because success for one is a success for everyone. Europe is an amazing undertaking for positive compromise, the constructive compromise. And really, social partnership is based on compromise, but this compromise helps us to progress and bring society closer together.
A question?
Thank you. You said that we were going to be talking about a minimum wage at European level. As far as I'm concerned, the minimum wage is a crutch. The question is, what is the fair wage? And that is to be seen in collective tariff agreements. How are you going to make sticking to collective bargaining agreements more attractive in the future? Mr. Schmit. I had a colleague in Luxembourg who said that minimum wage is when you don't have a collective bargaining agreement. And therefore it's important because not in all countries of the European Union, but in some countries, we have a very weakened compliance with collective bargaining agreements. Some countries, it's altogether absent. This obviously is linked to social dialogue. So we need to strengthen the social partners, and we have to show them that the way forward using collective bargaining agreements is the best way forward. It gives everybody rights, and it also gives the flexibility that we need in our societies. And if you have good dialogue in a company, then everybody understands each other. And this is something we've got to promote. Now, how can we do this? This is not something you can decree top down. You can't make everybody conclude a collective bargaining agreement. But by strengthening social dialogue, we have to make people more interested in having collective bargaining agreements. And we have to make quite clear that this is a good thing for the economy. We can think in terms of going through social dialogue to open the way forward. And I have the idea, for example, that the Economic and Social Committee will be asked to carry out a study to find out how this tariff policy can be promoted and strengthened throughout Europe. The OECD is working on this issue. The ILO is working on it as well. And we must be inspired by what they find out.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Nicolas Schmit, for your introduction. I think it's fair to say that the S&D family had been the driving force for the European Pillar of Social Rights. So it would not come as a surprise that we are attaching much weight on the implementation of this pillar. And you talked about an action plan. I would suggest that your job title would be changed to Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights. But my question would be, this action plan, which legislative measures and which financial support do you envision in order to make social progress and a just transition towards a sustainable society a reality for many people? So not only principles, but also reality.
I fully agree. When we adopted the social pillar in Göteborg, well, some of us were a bit skeptical because we thought, well, that's one more declaration. What happens to it? And then we very rapidly noticed that there is an increasing potential in this pillar of social rights, under one condition, that we have the political will to implement it, to translate it into concrete actions. And that's what this Commission intends to do. But it's also an invitation by the strategic agenda adopted by the European Council. And therefore, we will very rapidly, very fast work on this action plan, which means we have to translate the principles in actions, in concrete actions. That might be legislative actions, that might be just recommendations, that might be some ideas which member states have to translate, because we have to respect the competences of member states and the competence of the union, and very often these competences are shared. And so I think already in my mission letter there are a few legislative actions which are clearly stated. The minimum wage is one. The child guarantee, I think we have to frame what we mean by a child guarantee. We have the youth guarantee. I think we have to revamp, promote the youth guarantee, because young people out of job, that's the worst thing for Europe and for the credibility of Europe. So we have to redefine and encourage and strengthen the youth guarantee. We have the platform workers. I think we have to reflect what will be the best way to implement social rights and good working conditions for the platform workers. So these are several ones which sometimes request legal actions, legal instruments. And the finance, we have to gear our European Social Fund to the implementation of the pillar. That's obvious, because that's what we want to implement. That's what we want to achieve.
Madam Jongerius, follow-up question?
My follow-up question would also concentrate on the child guarantee, because I must say we highly appreciate the recent commitment of the Commission in this regard. So it's important that it's in their agenda, but my question would be what kind of instrument and also what kind of funding does the European Commission foresee for this European Child Guarantee? And how will you convince the member states to support the EP proposal in the ESF Plus negotiations and to allocate fresh money instead of redeploying from allocations intended for other objectives of this fund?
1 minute for the answer.
Thank you. We all agree that child poverty is the worst thing. Child poverty is destroying the future of these persons, because being a poor child very often means that you will be a poor adult. It's terrible for the individual, but it is also terrible for society. Now, there are already now many instruments, many measures acting for improving the situations of poor children. We have to refocus these actions. We have to bring them together. We have to concentrate them first on those who need it most in our societies. And I say it's not just in poor societies where there are poor children. It's also in wealthy societies where we have poor children. So we have to have a good approach how we deal with it. And I could imagine, basing on the work which has been done in the Parliament, to have some kind of recommendation. The money, important. Well, I have understood that you cannot have an ambitious policy, good for everybody, without funding. So I have noticed what the European Parliament has said, and I think this is an interesting way, and I will certainly bring that into the discussion, including with the Council.
Mr. Pislaru, your question, 1 minute.
Yeah. Mr. Schmit, is that, yeah. Mr. Schmit, we need a fighter on this portfolio with the ideas to drive it forward, but also the strength to fight the status quo. Our citizens, as shown in the election on the 26th of May, still have hope in Europe, and our group, Renew Europe, represents much of this hope to raise the bar in fulfilling the dream of a citizen-centered Europe. I have witnessed your professionalism in EBSCO work, and I see and I feel you can be the ambitious commissioner in having no hesitation in pushing further this agenda. However, nowadays we are in a dire situation. We have over 25% of our children living in poverty. We have youth limited in opportunities. We have the youth guarantee, we have the ESF Plus, and we are starting to see, as through the fog, the vague shape of the European social pillar. So, in terms of youth, how do you plan to actually link the youth guarantee with the future of work agenda and fulfill the promise towards a revamped youth guarantee?
2 minutes answer.
Thank you very much. I think that we have what I said already about the youth guarantee. We have to revamp, we have to rethink, we have to adapt youth guarantee to the present situation. Youth guarantee has been quite successful. Not everywhere in the same manner, but globally youth guarantee has been quite successful. But now we are facing new challenges. Well, first we have the issue of precariousness of our young people entering the labor market under very precarious conditions. This is something we have really to reflect on and to tackle this situation, because we have to give young people the opportunity to build their lives on more security. Second, well, the situation of the digital transition is something which is everywhere. And unfortunately, even young people, though they are playing all the time on their telephones, they are not always equipped with the knowledge to enter this new digital area. So one of my ideas will be to introduce for every young going through the youth guarantee or being unemployed a basic fundamental digital training, adapted to her or his knowledge, adapting also to the job they are aspiring to, but every young people has to get the tools to enter the digital labor market. This is one of the essential things. So I will ask my Directorate General to study how we give all the chances, all the opportunities to young people. And this has to be done also with other commissioners, the Commissioner for the Digital, the Commissioner for Education, how we can really push the young people and give them the best opportunities in the digital society, in the digital economy, in order to make it a good opportunity and not just a period of insecurity and of high risks.
Follow-up question, Mr. Pislaru.
First part, we need a bold plan, as you're suggesting. First, are you willing to see a restructuring of the Commission with at least a new unit or a directorate even dealing with children and youth? So that's the first part. The second part is what are the concrete plans to support the creation of a flexible and permanent skill set market in Europe, including vocational training and permanent upskilling? We need locksmiths to know digital locks. We have plumbers need to deal with smart heating systems, and car mechanics deal with smart sensors. Carpenters right now use 3D wood printers. How do you plan to support this and the new skill set market? Thank you.
It's very important, I indicated already, that's the good coordination between different commissioners, and also the coordination which has to be organized by the Vice President. So I have, as a Minister for Jobs, who has also to deal with skills, to work closely with the different commissioners, including also Commissioner Skinas. Second point, vocational training is essential. And vocational training is not the second best. It's always presented as the second best because you have not been successful to go to university, then you go to... No, vocational training is one of the best, equally best. And therefore, we have really to sustain, to support vocational training. This Commission has done a lot on promoting vocational training at national levels, at European levels, but also above the European Union. And everybody knows now that in those countries where vocational training is strong, youth unemployment is low. And that's the basis on which we have to build. And I guarantee that's also the integrating the digital in vocational. There is no difference. And also having new forms of training outside perhaps the classical training or the education system.
Madam Peter Hansen.
I'm going to speak in Danish to avoid any misunderstandings. Thank you for coming. Vi lever I en tid med...
We're living at a time of climate change, and we need to change over to a more sustainable way of living. My generation and all our Friday for Future friends require that we have a just transition. We have to make sure that Europeans have a proper basis for life so that they don't fall into poverty because of job loss, change career, and the need to care for a loved one. In Denmark, we know that a high level of social protection means that people can adapt and engage in lifelong learning. Will you be proposing a European minimum income, which is not the same as a minimum wage, so we can make sure that European workers are more flexible and can adapt without being afraid of falling into poverty? Thank you.
The answer, 2 minutes.
Well, first I would say that what you have said in the beginning is absolutely shared. And when you read the political guidelines by the president-elect, that's very clearly stated that we want in Europe a society of well-being, of social justice, of fairness. And this is something we have to strive for, because our historical experience shows us that when this is not anymore guaranteed, even Europeans might become crazy. So I think this is an essential part, politically crazy. This is an essential part of our European way of life, of our European social model. Now, about the revenue, a minimum revenue. We have in most of our countries, I think in nearly every country, a member state, we have some kind of a minimum revenue. But they are very different, very low in some, higher in others. And you might say, well, that's subsidiarity. No, there is some common thing, some common interest in having a guarantee for every citizen, European citizen, to be able to live decently, even if this person cannot be tomorrow on the labor market and can make a living of his or her own. And therefore, we have to look after some kind of criteria of benchmarks to permit people to live decently. This means, like the minimum wage, it cannot be the minimum revenue the same in Luxembourg and the same in Bulgaria or somewhere else. But it has to take into account the overall living standard and the situation, the economic, financial, budgetary situation. But it has also to guarantee to each European citizen, wherever he or she lives, a decent living. And that's we have to work on. If it should be what instrument is appropriate, that we have to study, because this has to be done in discussion, in dialogue with the member states, and especially also with all the organizations who are dealing with poverty and inclusion. I want to listen to what they have to tell me.
Follow-up question.
Det er jo dejligt at høre.
Thank you. It's very nice to hear. I'd like to ask you, when will you take on an obligation to take this up with Commissioner Dombrovskis and Commissioner Timmermans within the first 100 days so we can have a proper green transition? Thank you.
Not understood rightly the question. I must say the translation started.
You that I'm happy for your answer, if you will then commit to taking this question up with Dombrovskis and Frans Timmermans in order to secure this proposal within the first 100 days.
Well, we cannot finish the job in the first 100 days, but then we have to reinvent what we are doing for the rest of our mandate. But it's very clear that people expect some clear and strong signal very rapidly. So we have to sit together and study what are the best tools, what are the best instruments, what is the role of the European Union in promoting this minimum revenue standard all over Europe. And this has to be done rapidly. We will not push that at the end of the mandate. We will do that very rapidly. But, as I have to add, we have to consult. And I insist very much on consultation, because we commissioners do not know everything, I suppose. So we have to consult those who know sometimes things better than we do.
Madame Jamet.
Madame la Présidente. Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, Commissioner Designate. Employment is a very important issue that is of great concern to our citizens. There are challenges and pitfalls. And of course, the productive-oriented economy based on overconsumption and endless growth is one of those traps. And that's what it's based on. The austerity policy in Europe has an impact on our pensions. The European migrant inclusion policy in our labor markets harms those who are seeking jobs here in Europe, and there is a slippery slope towards slavery. Minimum standards are being pushed down, and this affects decent work. There's social dumping linked to the posting of workers. My question is, when are you going to let the economy serve us rather than the other way round? We have to make sure that we serve the people and not the opposite. Thank you.
La présidente élue.
The president-elect clearly stated that the European Union and the economy will be serving men and women. And everything included in the president-elect's program and everything in the main thrust of what I said is about strengthening social protection and the welfare state in Europe. It's about strengthening, it's about boosting social progress. At the same time, we have to tailor it to an economy that is changing and to tailor it to an economic environment that is changing, mainly because of globalization. And we mustn't be naive against the background of globalization. That is why we have to come up with our ideas and our own concepts in how to manage globalization. On social dumping, I truly believe that the current European Commission has put forward extremely significant proposals, especially on the posting of workers. I know that these proposals haven't been implemented yet because we're in the process of transposing the directive, but the principle is a vital principle that we have to protect. And of course, we have to implement this principle, so that's equal pay for equal work in the same place. So this is tantamount to a small revolution in the European Union. And we have started negotiations on the posting of workers. The European Union has managed and has succeeded, and this is the spirit that will continue our work. Now, on social justice and social protection, we have a tool at our disposal, and that's the recommendation on social protection for all and on inclusion. And that's why we're talking about a child guarantee. That's why we're talking about youth guarantee. All of this is about strengthening the welfare state and social protection. We can be proud of that.
Oui, juste quelques.
Yes. Now, what about the Uberization of our economy? I'm sure you agree that this isn't a good development. In the region that I am representing, apprentices are disappearing because of what is happening. So many trades are disappearing. Now, with what is happening to wages, I think this is a slippery slope. Wages are being pushed down, and then there are free trade agreements that are a huge risk for our economy. You know this. You just said that there could be future crises. You said that it is absolutely necessary to get the support of the European citizens. Then if you're saying this, it means something isn't working.
Nous avons évoqué.
We talked about protecting platform workers. This is what you call the Uberization of our economy. This Commission has said that it will work on working conditions, on protection, on social conditions pertaining to platform workers. This is an overarching goal for us. And this is something that we have to tackle immediately. I don't know whether it will be within the first 100 days, but we've got to do this immediately because this part of the economy is growing. It doesn't just have disadvantages, but of course we have to look at the issue of social regulation. So the social aspect shouldn't lag behind technological aspects. Now, we said this before, we want investment, and I'm hearing different voices from different countries, including one that you're very familiar with, and I'm being told that there is a desire to invest in youth training and dual training. We talked about this. This is the famous vocational training. This will allow young people to find decently paid jobs that are secure enough.
Question?
Panie komisarzu, jednym z
Commissioner, one of the priorities of the new European Commission is to support the development of small and medium-sized enterprises and worker mobility. This is very precious. But right now, work is being done on revising Regulation 883 and 987. And changes include increasing burdens on employers and increasing bureaucracy. So international transport, construction, or care sector can be affected. Therefore, I'd like to ask whether you envisage changing these provisions, but in order to strengthen competitiveness. And a number of states, including Poland, Slovakia, are countries that wanted to reject these new ideas.
I agree fully with you when you say that the small and medium-sized enterprises are very important. They are important for our economy, they are important for our growth, they are important for jobs. And they are the enterprises who create most of the jobs. But at the same time, we have to make sure that everybody who works has decent working conditions. Working in an SME or working in a big company. That's not the question. Every citizen, every worker in Europe has a right to have correct salary, correct wage, and correct working conditions. We have to help, we have to support SMEs in these changes, that's obvious. We have to make them fit for a new economy, for the digital economy. That's a very important element. And we cannot build the future of SMEs on bad working conditions and very low salaries. That's not the future for the economic model in Europe. I agree that the question of administrative burden remains always high on our agenda. We have to control that these burdens are not destroying the competitiveness, especially of SMEs. Therefore, the President has said that we have to be very careful by introducing always new legislation. We have to really assess if new legislation is necessary, but we cannot say that the economy does not need some kind of frames. And what has been done in the framework of 883, there are elements of making things easier. And I trust very much on our new digital capacity to make things more transparent, more easy, especially for SMEs, especially through the European exchange system on social security, where you can have very rapid exchanges of information, and also by the introduction of a social identity card.
Follow-up question.
Panie komisarzu.
Commissioner designate, the big absent in European policy is the family. We don't often work about family. I think family is being attacked and destroyed and redefined in Europe. What role do you see for European family in European policy? Although I do understand that this is not exactly European competence. In Poland, we think that a strong family means a strong Poland. Can we say the same thing about Europe?
Well, we all agree that family is the basis of our society. I think nobody was putting that into question. And when we talk about child poverty, when we talk about work and life balance, when we talk about fighting poverty with really strong means, we think also strengthening, helping, supporting families. Because child poverty is first family poverty. Poor children live in poor families. So we have really to design policies, not only through children, who help also the families. So I do not see how the European Union is not supporting and helping families. I think our social model is precisely helping, strengthening families by giving families good social and economic opportunities and the possibility, especially for kids, to go to school and to have good health care and have really equal opportunity. That's part of an active family policy which Europe supports. But I agree, family policies are mainly national, but they have also to follow basic rules or basic principles in relation to non-discrimination.
Please note that the follow-up question should stick to the main question always. Thank you. Mr. Willumsen.
Thank you, Chair. I will be speaking in Danish. Herr Schmit,
Mr. Schmit, in your written reply to the European Parliament, you say that a European initiative on a minimum wage should respect the competences of member states and the social partners and also national traditions for collective bargaining agreements. Can you then tell us whether you can guarantee that minimum wage fixed by European legislation will respect those countries which don't have minimum wage but which determine the level of wages through collective bargaining agreements as we do in the Nordic model? And if so, can you tell us exactly how you'll ensure this? Thank you.
Well, we just talked about the importance, the essential importance of collective bargaining and how we should revamp, support, develop, strengthen collective bargaining all over Europe. So how could I, when I've said that, when I have shared this view, on the other hand, weaken a system which is based on collective bargaining and which has been very successful, including establishing good wages and fairness in the world of work. So this frame for minimum wages by no means, I say it very clearly, by no means will put into question the system based on collective bargaining which provides for good wages in the countries where it applies, and we will not force by no means these countries to change their very old and very well established transition. Now, I think we have not the intention, by the way, to fix a European minimum wage. How could we? What we want to do is to create a framework, especially in those countries where this bargaining system, collective bargaining system, doesn't exist, to make sure that minimum wages are established in a transparent and predictable way. That's the frame we have to establish. But this does not touch upon the tradition, the culture of collective bargaining, where wages in all sectors, including the minimum wages, are the result of this collective bargaining. So I do not see any danger for this system, which we have absolutely to preserve. And I would encourage many countries to copy it, but that's not so easy.
Mr. Willumsen.
Tak, Herr Schmit.
Thank you, Mr. Schmit. As a follow-up question, can I ask you to tell us whether you agree that a legal proposal for minimum wages should contain an exemption for those countries which have a high degree of organization and where most of the labor market is covered by collective bargaining agreements? Thank you.
If you want to call it an exemption, call it an exemption. It's clear. I was very clear on that. I think we will not put disturbance or put this system into trouble by creating this kind of a European frame for minimum wages. We have to preserve what works well, don't fix what works well. So this is a guarantee I can give you.
Second round of question. We are already 10 minutes late in the timing. Please note that, and please be very precise with your timing. The second round of question will start with Madame Fransen.
Ik zal het in het Nederlands doen.
I'll speak Dutch. Thank you very much. Commissioner, digitalization and the development of platform economy is something that's ongoing, and we know that this gives a number of opportunities for European workers, and that's a good thing. But on the other hand, the platform economy also contains a number of negative aspects when it comes to the working conditions, 0-hour contracts and part-time work. So my question is how you're going to ensure social protection for all workers, irrespective of their contractual conditions, and whether you can extend provisions like the Posting of Workers Directive to the platform economy so that you can improve working conditions. Thank you.
As I mentioned already, we have to make sure that the technological evolution is escaping us, and that the social guarantees, the social protection we have created in Europe is finally completely destroyed by this technological evolution. As you probably know, in the US, in California, they have now adopted a law on platform workers. This is very interesting because that's the place where finally the whole platform economy was invented. And they were totally aware that there is a gap now between the technological evolution and the social conditions. And we have really to close this gap. And that's what finally this Commission has started to do with the directive on predictable and transparent working conditions, with the recommendation on social protection, which covers also self-employed persons. We have to make sure that these rights are strengthened and developed, that people working on the platforms, they have the same social rights than all the other workers. They should have the right also to have collective bargaining, by the way. So we have to sort out then when people come together, also platform workers who are considered to be self-employed, that they are not opposed to competition law, because that's absurd. So we have to give them really the same rights. And therefore we will have a comprehensive approach to the social and working conditions of platform workers. For that reason, I will work with Madam Vestager, Vice President Vestager, but also the Commissioner in charge of industry. And my idea would be to gather very rapidly a big conference with all the stakeholders to discuss this and then work on a good standard for people in the new digital economy.
Madam Fransen.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I don't think anybody will blame me as a Belgian for saying that our expectations for your work are very high. So you can continue the work of the person you're replacing, Ms. Tyson. And then I want to ask you a question about sham self-employed people. This is something which has been on the table for a while. How are you going to attack this issue without attacking the rights of people who are self-employed? Thank you.
Well, nobody wants to attack the self-employed. And those who want to be self-employed should stay self-employed. There are many people, young people, who want to be self-employed. We do not want to prohibit them to be self-employed. The second point is, once you have said that, self-employed should have the same social protection rights than other workers. Because if we do not guarantee some social protection, we will have a big problem in the next 10, 20 or 30 years, or maybe immediately. If they have no health insurance, what happens if they are ill? If they have no insurance against accidents, very concrete cases we experience with so-called self-employed in the Uber economy. What happens to them when they have an accident? So I think we have to respect self-employment, if it's really accepted self-employment. If it's wrong self-employment, where finally people are employed, but they are told that they are self-employed, then we have to correct this situation absolutely.
Madame Wendt, your question, 1 minute.
Tak til ordstyreren. Jeg taler dansk.
Thank you very much. I'll be speaking Danish, and I'd like to thank Mr. Schmit for coming along today and for sitting up at the top table rather than next to me. The working environment and security is a question of life and death for workers. The S&D group is therefore disappointed that in your mission letter by Commission President-elect Ursula von der Leyen, there's no commitment to improve working conditions. On behalf of the S&D group, I'd like to ask you the following question. The previous Commission came up with a strategic framework on health and safety at work to 2014 to 2020. Will the Commission come up with a follow-up with a European vision of zero fatal accidents at work and zero work-related cancer? And when will you present the promised fourth batch of proposals on harmful substances under the Carcinogens and Mutagens Directive? Thank you.
When you say that you want an economy which serves the people, I think one of the first elements of such an economy is to protect people at work. And it is absolutely a scandal that people who go to their workplace, they are exposed to health risk, they are exposed to major accidents, and some at the evening they cannot go home because they have died on their workplace. So for me, health and safety is an absolute priority. You have said this is not in my mandate. Yes, it is absolutely in my mandate. There is something on working conditions, by the way, linked to platform, but I read it as a more general invitation. But it's number 10 of the principles of the social pillar. And we have to work out an action plan, and we have to implement the social pillar. And we have to, where needed, also to adopt legislative measures to implement the social pillar. So this will happen absolutely to health and safety. We have to, certainly I could not imagine that after the expiring of the framework, we just would say, well, this is not needed anymore. So I certainly will work on that and make proposals to the college. We have to work on new issues which are important in this field. You have mentioned a bunch of these directives linked to cancer and to other substances. I think there is good preparation work which has already been done so that we can table these directives quite rapidly and start the legislative process. We have to look at the new forms of health dangers, like the more psychosocial. And for that, I think social partners, they are discussing for the moment about digital economy, and they have included in the discussion on digital economy also these aspects of working conditions, because in this new digital economy, working conditions is a very important issue, but health and safety has forms of mental illness, for instance, which has to be tackled and looked after.
Follow-up question?
Mange tak, Mrs. Schmit.
Thank you, Mrs. Schmit. I was very happy to hear that reply. According to the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work, every fourth worker is experiencing workplace-related stress. And they also say that there's a risk for serious losses in productivity due to musculoskeletal disorders. Unfortunately, both the Barroso and Juncker commissions refused to take action on this matter. If you become a commissioner, will you propose additional initiatives to improve the working environment in order to prevent occupational stress and repetitive stress injuries? Thank you.
Just mentioned the new economy, and these are elements also of the new economy. These are elements also in a period of big transformations in the companies, where people are really suffering from stress, even sometimes going to suicides. So this is something very serious, and this is something which engages not only the Commission, but it engages first the employees and the employers. And the employers have to be aware that these situations are bad, not only for their employees, but they are at the end bad for the whole company. So I think we have really to foster the awareness that we have to find the right solutions on the working environment linked to stress, to burnouts, to this musculoskeletal, I don't know, diseases. Now, it's not easy to come up with legislation. That's very difficult because some countries have tried, but no real good solution has been. This is a question of very practical approaches. It's a question of no size fits all, very adapted to all kinds of enterprises. But it has first to be a question of awareness. It's bad for everybody. It's bad for the worker, and it's certainly bad also for the company. Because when you have this mental illness, people are absent not for days, they are absent for weeks, sometimes for months, or they have difficulties to reintegrate anyway their job. So really we have to work on that with social partners, with the member states, and I'm optimistic that we can come to some positive results.
Madame Brunet, and your questions?
Madame la Présidente. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Schmit. The free movement of workers is one of the greatest success stories of Europe. It promotes exchange among European peoples, and it provides job opportunities, and it opens up markets to goods and services. However, more and more Europeans feel that mobility rules are not fair and that this free movement is leading to unfair competition and is harming justice between workers. If you have two companies, and if the same work is being carried out, they might have very different labor costs. Commissioner designate, do you agree with my appraisal of the situation, and how do you think that we can respond to the situation that could harm the feeling that people belong to the EU? Thank you. I think that free movement and free provision of services is one of the success stories of Europe, as you said yourself. And when the rules are applied properly, in other words, if there's no social dumping or fraud, then it's a win-win situation. However, if we do have forms of what we call social dumping, then of course it becomes harmful. We have achieved a lot of progress in relation to the Posting of Workers Directive. I mentioned this before. The principle is equal pay for equal work in the same place. Now, what we have to do is properly implement this. I would even go as far as saying that we have to implement this very scrupulously, because this isn't just about the countries that receive workers, but also the countries that send workers, because no country should be allowed to use social dumping for their own employees and workers. It just flies in the face of the European spirit. So I'm counting on the European Labour Authority to make sure that the system works properly, that we fight against abuses, and that everyone is on an equal footing as far as possible. Now, the situation is quite complex because in Europe, when it comes to social security, we don't have a social security system which is the same across the board. We don't want that. Every member state feels very strongly about their own social security system. So when you have services rendered outside the country for a few days or weeks, we can't oblige someone to sign up to the social security system of that host country because there are benefits that they would never get. So I'm not quite sure how we can have a uniform system in the case of the provision of services. Now, of course, the European Commission will analyze this carefully to see whether something can be done. I have doubts, but of course we have to look at whether there are unacceptable competition situations. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Schmit. I do have a follow-up question. Do you think that this improved social convergence might be an answer to our skills shortages in many European countries? Thank you.
Je crois que
I think that our goal is to achieve economic convergence. It's very important. We cannot build a Europe based on solidarity if there are huge disparities. And also, all of this has to be built on social convergence, because solidarity and the European promise, if you like, is about shared prosperity. That is why we have to make sure that European citizens, no matter where they live, have proper living and working conditions. We want to be able to also guarantee free movement for all European citizens. At the moment, there are 17 million Europeans that live in a country that is different to their country of origin. And since they live in a different country and they're working in a different country, they're also helping deal with labor shortages that might exist here and there. Everyone benefits from this. Free movement shouldn't be about forced free movement. It should be voluntary. We want a free movement that benefits the country of origin and the country of destination. That's the only way we can build solidarity in Europe.
From Econ.
Thank you very much indeed. I should like to put my question in German. Mr. Schmit, in the mission letter, it talks about unemployment reinsurance as one of the tasks for you. And in your opening remarks, you made a very brief reference to stabilizers on the markets. Well, I'd like to ask you exactly how do you envisage this unemployment reinsurance scheme working without getting into moral hazard situations? So I'd like to hear your ideas on that. Thank you.
Erstens würde ich mal sagen,
first of all, I could begin by saying that the context is essential. You need to understand exactly the context of when exactly a scheme will kick into action. And that needs to be defined very carefully. What sort of economic shock would be considered a qualifying factor to trigger a reinsurance scheme? And these are, of course, parameters that we have to set jointly. And within that context, we need to ensure that there wasn't any moral hazard in the run-up to events. So it's not the instrument that would engender moral hazard. It's actually moving things further back. But I think, quite simply, we need to be sure that we're robust in budgeting. And I know that you're defending this all the time. And we need to ensure, obviously, that member states play by the rules. It's not okay to disrespect rules and rely on a system that would kick in to save the day. That's not what the thinking behind this idea. There can, of course, be economic shocks, and those shocks can be asymmetrical in nature. And sadly, that's a fact. And it's part and parcel of our economic model. So that's something we have to cushion. We have to shield people. It's not about setting up financial transfers from one region to another, but quite simply that in the event of a shock, those who are worst affected are not pushed further down through the shock, and that people living in those economies get some form of security, some safety net in a time when the state is perhaps in a very difficult position and struggling to guarantee that safety net. And I'm quite optimistic that it is possible to do that.
Dann ganz konkret.
Well, concretely, if you look at the economic situation over the past decade in the European Union and how that's been developing, where would you say would have been a good time to have this type of mechanism? When it would it have been triggered? A concrete example, please. Yes, I do have a number of concrete examples, but I don't know whether I should be naming them specifically. Looking at the last crisis, however, I could say that in quite a few countries, the cause was not necessarily budget deficit. They simply were dragged into the crisis. They were drawn in, despite the fact they had surpluses in certain cases. And I'm sure you will know which countries I'm referring to, including southern European countries. And those countries were hit very badly by the crisis. And young people were the worst off in that situation, unable to find jobs. And these people were the victims. That's why the Youth Guarantee was set up. Comments off microphone.
Sorry, no follow-up question, no comments, no remarks at this point. Madam Nina Gill, also from Econ, your question, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. And Mr. Schmit, you've outlined the role of social economy in tackling poverty and reducing inequality. I welcome the greater emphasis by the EU on the social economy because I believe it fosters alternative business models while addressing key social concerns. Could you clarify the potential of social economy in the sustainable transition and how you would combine this with the current challenges in investment for social needs? And I also would like very quickly to follow up on Marcus Ferber's point in terms of the European Unemployment Benefit Reinsurance Scheme. Could you actually maybe dwell a bit on how will you garner support from member states which have so far opposed it, and how will you ensure that this kind of counter-cyclical stabilization function will support national unemployment schemes in times of stress and stimulate public investment without punitive conditionality for the member states? Thank you.
The first point on social economy, I think we have already a very active, all over Europe, a very active social economy, which is acting in our regions, in our territories, which is delivering important social services, especially very often to those who need it most, who guarantee care, childcare, care for the elderly. So this is a very important sector in our society. And so we have to strengthen this sector, not only because it delivers good social services, but it's also an active job creator. Because we have seen during the whole crisis that this is a sector where finally no jobs were destroyed. There were even jobs created in this sector without an unemployment reinsurance scheme. So we really have to promote that. About investment, I think this is an important point. The Parliament has allowed to write into the strategic investment program, the Juncker plan, the right also to give loans, to give credits to the social economy. This is a very important recognition of the economic and social role of social economy. And this means also that we have to focus a lot on social investments. If we have to have a competitive economy, we have also to have stable social conditions, which means social investment in education, in childcare, in health. This makes a good economy when you have stable social, a stable social environment. So investment in social services is very important. And then the new economy, I think there is a linkage between new economy, but there is also the sustainability where the social economy can be very active. New models for energy, for instance, or other issues. On the unemployment scheme, I think we have to work hard and persuade and take away the understandable reservations which we just have heard, that it's not a model just to finance or to encourage moral hazard, but it's again in the interest not of the country which benefits, but it's in the country, in all in the interest of all the countries, and especially of a stable European monetary union.
Madam Gill, follow-up question.
Yeah, just to follow up on the issue of unemployment, you refer to the impact of digitalization and AI in the workplace. Now, it's estimated 50% of the jobs in EU will either change or disappear. There are 61 million people with low skills. What measures will you put into place as Commissioner to tackle the skills gap that exists, and also keeping in mind the greater gender parity that is necessary, especially in the tech sector?
Yes, I would not discuss the 50%, but certainly the impact of the digital economy or the digital transformation will be very strong and very heavy. What is not taken into account are the new jobs, but the new jobs can only be occupied if people have the right skills. So anyway, skilling, upskilling is the central issue for the forthcoming years. We have really to make sure that not only the young people have the right skills, they have the good education, but also those who are in a job now get the upskilling or reskilling to face the transformations of their jobs, or even the jobs which will disappear and they have to take new jobs. So we have to invest more in upskilling and in reskilling. ESF Plus has to dedicate more money into skilling and upskilling. This is a central issue, and this has really to be integrated also in the country-specific recommendation, which has been done already in the near past. So I think investing more money in people, that's essential. We have a skills agenda, and I've been invited by the President-elect to revise, to revamp, to strengthen this skills agenda, and that will be focused on that.
Thank you for answering the follow-up question that actually wasn't a follow-up question. It was a new question. I would kindly ask you to be strict with yourself when it comes to timing. We are quite late at this time, so please, an answer, a question should only take 1 minute, not more than 1 minute. Maybe less comments and more questions. The next one is Mr. Saturi with his question.
Si, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much. I think we can all agree that the European promise should be based on two pillars. The right to work should protect everybody, and the social pillar should protect everybody, but economic operators avoid both by using independent workers, self-employed workers, and they draw up workers' rights without workers' rights. People are more and more precarious. There's no respect for working time. And through a lot of subcontracting, at the end of the day, you can't find who's actually overall in charge. Sometimes there are accidents, there's a crisis of kind, and because you've got subcontractor on subcontractor, the rules are not complied with. So can I ask you, are you going to propose legislation to reinforce the application of workers' rights and labor rights throughout Europe, so it applies to everybody? And will you reinforce the social responsibility of economic operators, irrespective of how they work through subcontractors, so that if there's an accident, you can find out who is in overall charge and apply labor law? Very specifically, on your first question on subcontracting, the first directive, which amends the Posting of Workers Directive, says very clearly that there is a responsibility on the person who has subcontracted. So there is a chain, as you said, and the responsibility needs to be very clearly identified. And there I expect the labor authorities to follow up cases where weird and wonderful constructions have meant that you don't know who's responsible. And that is obviously to the detriment of workers who are seconded from country to country through letterbox companies. So this is something that we need to work on, but it does require very strict application of existing legislation. On good work, I think we need to be aware that this idea of competition, everyone against everybody else, cannot be the foundation of our economic situation, our economic model. I think we have an ongoing crisis. We're trying to find the virtues of what would be a real social market economy with rights and with social negotiations. That's what we should be encouraging, with social rights for all categories of workers. We talked about platform workers. We talked about seconded worker who can't be exposed to all sorts of conditions. There have to be strict rules and strict controls. Now, where you're going to see that there is abuse, where you see abuse, in each case you have to think, how can we limit this and how can we fight this abuse? I know all these new kinds of work, self-employed, and people half the time don't even know that they are self-employed. We need rules, and we'll work on those rules over the next 5 years. Commissioner, thank you for your reply. You correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems you're saying that in the case of seconding and subcontracting, we have national competence. If we want European competence, we can't rely on member states to carry out inspections. So do you think we should be moving towards an authority at European level and that there would be inspections organized at European level? Europe is always a matter of step-by-step progress. I think the setting up of an authority to deal with work should start by giving us a good tool, because this authority for work is a member state, it's a commission, but it's also the presence of social partners. So it's also the trade unions. I think this authority can organize inspections on site where these practices are taking place and can then make proposals to fight these abuses very strongly. I believe that the member states must have the resources and the means to deal with this. Everybody's complaining about social dumping. And yet, and I'm talking about the country I know well as well, the resources for labor inspection have not been increased. Indeed, they've been cut back. So you can't talk about social dumping on the one hand and then not have the instruments to deal with the issue. It's important for Europe to play a role, but also to push member states to act. But I think you have to be patient before Europe can take on the role itself.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll be speaking in Italian. Mr. Schmit, I would like to draw your attention to two issues relating to mobile borders, cross-border work when the social security coordination was overhauled is important, and then, of course, relocation to other EU member states. So on the first issue, last March, the text didn't obtain a qualified majority voting in the Council because of the opposition put forward by some countries, including Luxembourg. How are you going to reconcile defending the national interest of your own country with the one-size-fits-all policy that the European Commission has followed when it comes to coordinating social security systems? Now, on the second topic, relocations within member states and worker mobility, as well as posting of workers, can lead to a very dangerous form of social dumping, as you mentioned yourself. Are you planning to introduce new industrial policies that will at least prevent or limit social dumping? Thank you.
Sur la première question du de majorité qualifiée.
Now, yes, on the first issue, it's true there was no QMV, but it wasn't Luxembourg that lay behind that. I can reassure you, madam, I am Commissioner designate, but I am not a Luxembourger that has the ambition of becoming a European Commissioner. So European commissioners think about the common European interests. So please fear not. Thanks to the European Parliament, I think that we will find a solution for 883 in order to achieve a balanced solution which will allow for proper mobility, but at the same time protects all workers and employees when it comes to social security issues. Now, on social dumping, we have now introduced a broad raft of measures. We talked about the directive on the posting of workers. So now what we have to do is ensure proper implementation of this directive. It isn't about coming up with new legal instruments each time, new legislative proposals. What is important is to implement something to the letter. As was said before, we have to follow this in a very detailed manner. And if there are new forms of social dumping, then we're going to have to really react quickly in order to come up with measures that will be tailored to tackle these specific new forms. So we have a tool. Now we have to implement it and enforce it properly. The European Labour Authority is a new tool at our disposal. We have to make sure it gains momentum and it works effectively.
Al dumping sociale, alla...
Now, on social, what about social dumping and unfair competition between countries, especially between Italy and neighboring countries? Now, we don't want a slippery slope where workers' rights are being reduced. And of course, we want to make sure that we have proper transitions as well. And we have the political project that Ursula von der Leyen mentioned. I'd like to know how you're planning to tailor wage policies within the EU member states, because there are huge imbalances. It's all about different labor costs. That is what leads to relocation and social dumping. And there's huge injustice both when it comes to work and the labor market. Thank you very much in advance.
Je pense que vous avez déjà
I think that you have given us leads on what to do. So what we want to do is reinforce social convergence. We cannot build a competitive, dynamic and innovative Europe if we have unbridled competition and have a race to the bottom. It's not about who's going to have the lower wages. That isn't going to work, because there'll always be a country somewhere else in the world that will have lower wages. However, when we talk about the framework for a minimum wage, where there will be some kind of wage convergence. And now, wage convergence isn't about having the same minimum wage in Bulgaria, Romania, Luxembourg, and France. Convergence is different, and we have to work on convergence. And if we have a proper minimum wage framework, then that's going to have a knock-on effect beyond the minimum wage. It's going to have an impact on all wages, and I think this will allow us to fight against social dumping.
Commissioner designate, among your responsibilities is the child guarantee. Our priority should be to fight poverty. And thanks to the measures that we took in Poland, we were able to reduce poverty by 50%. In your responses, you say that to improve the situation of children, we should improve the conditions of the families. And I'd like to ask whether this covers also taking away children from parents, for example, by Jugendamt. And children are taken away from families without any justification. The European Parliament adopted a resolution in the last term, but on the subject, but the Commission refused to deal this issue. Are you going to take up this problem?
Mais pourquoi la Commission a refusé?
But why did the European Commission refuse? It's pretty straightforward. It isn't a power that the EU has. This falls within the remit of EU member states. I cannot give my opinion on specific cases. Yes, maybe there are cases where it is in the interest of the child not to stay with their parents, but these are specific cases. It's not Brussels who will decide who, why, when, and under what conditions such measures should be taken. I think that this falls within the remit of the member states and the relevant departments. Now, on the child guarantee, you said it yourself. Any action that promotes equal opportunities for children and investment in children is something that we should welcome. And this is something that we should showcase for others who might want to follow in our footsteps.
Madam Szydło, follow-up question?
Without doubt, we are talking about the responsibilities of the member states, and therefore, don't you think that such cooperation between member states should take place? Because the Europeans that addressed the Commission and the European Parliament for help are Europeans, and they felt to be treated like citizens of second rate. And therefore, don't you think that the Commission, like the European Parliament, should take up this issue, and maybe the Commission should work on this with the member states?
Je répète encore une fois que
Let me repeat. The way I see it, it is not the competence of the Commission to intervene directly. If there are cases between member states, cases that arise between member states where we're talking about family law in a number of different countries, we need to look at how we can solve these situations which arise because we now live in a world where parents frequently have different nationalities. We have to make sure that family law is applied correctly and in the interest of the child. I think what's most important is the interest of the child. We've all ratified the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and we have to make sure that those rights are respected and preserved. Thank you.
Paropoulos?
Dear Commissioner-elect, the European Network on Independent Living organized its conference this week. So I dare to say that my question is timely. I would like to know if the Commission plans to include measures in the European Disability Strategy for 2020-2030 to improve access to the labour market for disabled persons, including measures to promote social inclusion and social enterprises, accessible recruitment procedures, accessible transport from and to the workplace, career development and training, and finally, obviously accessible workplaces.
I think we have adopted recently now the Accessibility Act, which is a progress and which helps disabled persons also in their working life. But it's very clear that our employment policies have to be much more focused on what we could call vulnerable populations. And when we look at the figures, we really see that people with disability are those who have the most difficulties, or among those who have the most difficulties on the labor market. First, because very often they have not the skills. And why don't they have the skills? Because our school systems already are not very much in favor very often of disabled persons. So they have not the occasion to get the skills and the education because our school systems are not geared to their needs, specific needs. So we have to make sure also in that sector that there is no discrimination, because no discrimination is one of our fundamental principles. Second, we have to make sure that disabled persons can indeed get exactly the same opportunities, exactly the same chances on the labor market. And therefore, we have to dedicate more means, more resources out of also of the ESF into policies which include all categories of persons who have greater difficulties on the labor market. And disabled persons are among them. So I think this is really an objective for our inclusive society we are really striving for. And I would really like to make out of this subject one of our big objectives, one of our big aims of the next years, to give the opportunity to everybody, including also the people with disability. And I must say, new technologies could help us. New technologies are the right way, but then we have to support people in getting the right skills, the right digital skills, and I'm optimistic that we can at least reduce sharply the gaps which still exist.
Follow-up question.
Do you think the corporate social responsibility could be a suitable tool to stimulate employers to employ disabled workers, with incentivizing measures for employers to freely engage to this process would you propose? And thank you very, very much for your answerings.
I'm a believer in social responsibility, but at the same time, I do not expect everything. So you have also to get some rules and to oblige employers to respect these rules. There are countries who oblige employers indeed to employ at least 1%, 5%, or I do not remember how much in Luxembourg this is the case, 5% of their staff hiring people who are disabled. So I think we have to play on both. But it is, again, the vision of a more cohesive society to give everybody a good opportunity. And I have seen in many cases when I was still a Minister of Labour that there is no difference in the capacities of a person with disability and others. They can be as much and sometimes more productive because they are more motivated. So encouraging entrepreneurs or companies, yes, but pushing them a bit and helping them also, because you have also to accommodate the working place, for instance. These are instruments we should really develop.
Madam Al-Salani.
Thank you. I will be speaking in Swedish. Tack, fru ordförande.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Schmit, both for your written and for your oral replies. I like to see your enthusiasm. I think you'll need it. In Article 4 and 45 of the treaty's article, the EU must respect the equality of the member states and as expressed in their national traditions, and this should be ring-fenced by the Commission's rules on subsidiarity. Now, why are we asking this question about our tradition for collective bargaining agreements in the North? Commissioner after commissioner says that they're not going to fix what isn't broken, but then they make proposals after proposals. So I'd like to know, how are you going to ensure that you don't fix what isn't broken and that you respect the autonomy of the labour market partners? Thank you.
Well, I can only repeat what I've said. You know, I'm really a fan of subsidiarity. And I'm really a fan, I can say it, also of social systems which are based on strong social dialogues, on strong social partners. And it would really be absurd to interfere in this system or try to alterate this system. So what I can say is that if we put forward a text on a framework for minimum wages, there will be full guarantees for all the systems which are based on collective bargaining. So I cannot say more. I give you this guarantee, and be sure that I will talk a lot to my colleagues in the Commission who are directly also and who are very sensitive to this issue, but I will also talk to the European Parliament and to those here who are very sensitive to this issue. Several of you have already mentioned it. And I will go to these countries, including Sweden, but also some other countries, to really discuss with social partners and governments to make sure that you can absolutely preserve your system you are so much attached to.
Follow-up question?
Tusen tack för ditt...
Thank you very much for your reply. Obviously, that allays my fears. But sometimes people get a bit trigger happy. And therefore, for us who have this model based on a culture and a tradition and history, something that we've come up with, a system that works and which guarantees a very high level of rights, it's important for us. And you're also talking about social dialogue, and you said that that social partners were welcome to participate. But how would you structure this dialogue so that the social partners can also be involved?
On this particular issue? Well, I think when we are talking about a framework or legal framework on minimum wages, I could not imagine not to talk to social partners. This is something which I really cannot imagine. And not only talking at the European level to social partners, but we also have to go to the social partners in the different member states, and especially to those who are very sensitive to this issue for the reasons you just elaborated on. And we have to talk to them and to make sure that what we want to establish is preserving absolutely the system. Because, well, it's not an issue. It's not the issue to transform or alterate or change or this system, which has worked well. So I really want to give you all the tranquility I can that that's not my intention and will never be.
Mr. Pattern, your question?
Does the Commissioner agree with me that when it comes to jobs, the European Union is institutionally racist? Despite President von der Leyen's mission to you to promote full and productive employment and decent work for all, you've made no specific plans for the shocking situation facing many of the 50 million European citizens who come from an ethnic and racial minority. Research suggests that 1 in 4 of these European citizens are discriminated at work. In some member states, as many as 76% are not in employment, education or training, compared to 8% of the rest. Here in Belgium, the home of the EU, 1/3 of Belgians are educated to degree level, compared to 60% of Afro-Belgians. Yet those Afro-Belgians are likely to be 4 times more likely to be unemployed. Only 1% of staff directly employed by the EU has a minority background. The EU motto is united in diversity. Frankly, it should be united in diversity as long as you're white. Where better for the new Commissioner of Jobs to start than with Europe's worst transgressor, his own organisation, the institution of the EU itself? Why should Member States take any notice of the Commissioner or the President if they fail to get their own house in order? Or does the Commissioner agree with me that when it comes to jobs, the European Union is institutionally racist?
2 minutes for the answer.
I can be shorter. I think non-discrimination is a fundamental principle of the European Union. But I'm not naive. I'm not naive. I know that there are vulnerable populations who are suffering also on the job market. And really, we have not only have good principles, we have to give us the right instruments to implement these good principles everywhere, including in our own businesses, in our own institutions, wherever. I think this is something which also characterizes Europe. And we have to work hard on that. And I think what I've said on other vulnerable population applies also to people with different origins. And certainly I will fight and engage myself and commit myself to apply and to make sure that this principle of non-discrimination for any reason is really applied and enforced. And this is up to the member states, but it's also up to all companies. And many intelligent companies, they start understanding that diversity is a big asset. So let's encourage them and let's duplicate their good example.
Mr. Patton.
I don't buy that, Mr. Schmit. I think you've absolutely fudged it. 20 years after EU laws forbidding discrimination, the EU continues to hide behind its policy in terms of being colourblind. The social pillars pledge equal opportunities and access regarding employment regardless of racial or ethnic origin. You've come forward with no plans for that. You talk, you promise about action, you promise concrete actions, yet you have nothing to say except vague. Please get your own house in order. Why can you not do that immediately? There's no consultation, you've no stakeholders, you can do it for your own department. Will you do that?
Very briefly, I have no problem to do so, really. And give me a chance. I'm not yet a commissioner, I'm only a commissioner designate. But non-discrimination is high on our agenda. And I'm sure it's very high on the agenda of the whole Commission, and especially also of the President-elect of this Commission. So we really work for it. But there are no easy, it's easy to accuse, but there are no unfortunately, easy solutions. But we will, 20 years, that's the past. We look at the future. I am not responsible for the past. I maybe become responsible for the future. And we come back in 5 years and then evaluate the situation.
Mr. Pizarro, your question.
Muito obrigado, senhora.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Schmit, for your detailed replies. Now, despite some positive changes in 2007, we still have 130 million Europeans at risk of poverty or social exclusion, and for the S&D group, for our group, it's unacceptable. And that's why I would ask you, Commissioner Designate, can you commit to coming forward with a European strategy on combating poverty? One that is strengthened and integrated and supporting workers and ensuring that there's equality of rights, gender equality, and tackling the problem of youth unemployment, especially long-term unemployment. Figures are very high amongst this population. Thank you.
We had an ambitious objective, 20 million poor people less, and we didn't really attain this objective. There is improvement in the last years, but we have not obtained the objective we had fixed in 2010. Now, I think we are talking a lot about poverty, and it is difficult to accept that in the richest part of the world, there are so many, 1 out of 5 people living in poverty, sometimes in very deep poverty. So I think we need efficient, well-funded resources to combat this situation. And we need the good way, the good strategy to do so. And I think, as I mentioned already, it's in the interest of everybody, of each member state, and of the Union as such. So we have to use first the European resources. There is the idea that at least 25%, the Parliament proposes more, of the funds going for inclusion, fighting poverty. We have to have a comprehensive strategy for fighting poverty. We have talked a lot about kids. Kids are very important in this strategy to fight poverty. And the child guarantee is part of this strategy. We cannot separate this child guarantee from an overall strategy to fight poverty. Young people, yes, young people very often not well skilled, needs. So we have to focus on these categories, on vulnerable people, also people with disability who do not find a job, who end up in big poverty. Single parents, that's the family issue. Single parents are those who are the most in poverty risk. So I think we have to get this comprehensive strategy. We have to have the right resources in the ESF+. We have decided that already. And we have to get strong lines also in the country-specific recommendation, which is already the case, to really focus. Because here also there is no one-size-fits-all. We have to adapt to the different contexts, to regions, to localities, to urban poverty, to rural poverty. This is a very differentiated picture. And so we have really to encourage member states to be part of that strategy, because at the end, it's the member state who has to play an important role.
Mr. Pizarro.
Thank you, Mr. Schmit. To fight against poverty, I think we must come back to the issue of the minimum income. And I must ask you if you are committed to an European framework directive on decent minimum income schemes, setting minimum standards for the national systems in order to provide social protection floors in all member states.
I do not want now to commit myself on the type of instrument we need. It can be a directive, it can be another instrument. It's not the question. What is the question is that we really have in each member countries the right level of minimum income. But minimum income is an indispensable, and I said that already to a colleague, it is an indispensable instrument, because if that doesn't exist or is at the too low level, really we have huge problems in our societies. Huge problems in our societies. I will not go into details. But it's only also a part of an overall strategy. Employment, skills, education, housing. Housing is fundamental if we want really to fight poverty. If people cannot afford a decent housing, well, they will not come out of poverty. They will not have a job. And this is the vicious circle we have to break.
Madam Walsh, your question.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, picking up from a previous question you briefly discussed regards the role we must all play in supporting our citizens and their mental health. I want to outline for anybody sitting in here and for hopefully people watching that across Europe, 1 in 6 of our citizens have mental health problems, and that the total costs related to mental health are equivalent to more than 4% of our GDP. Employment rates are significantly lower among our citizens with mental health problems. Building and ensuring that we have the right policies in place is essential to the millions we represent, and not just in the Commission, in the European Parliament and in the Council. Commissioner-elect, in your role, can you outline any specific actions for developing a mental health policy for the workplace? Thank you.
Well, this is linked to an overall policy for people with disability. That's something, it's part of that. And we have to find schemes for these persons to work. Perhaps they can work, but they cannot work in any job, and they cannot work full-time. So there has to be a progressive integration of these persons into the world of work, into a job. The companies who are doing that have to be accompanied, have to be helped. So there is an overall strategy. I worked on that when I was a labor minister, together with the health minister and the minister for families and social affairs. So we're really putting into place also some guidance, some counseling for the enterprises, taking the risk, but also engaging, committing to some strong social, social commitment to take on board, to take some people with mental health. That's the first point. The second point is, yes, we have a sector which can better deal with this kind of people. That's the social economy. We have to promote jobs also which can be taken by people who perhaps have difficulties in other companies, but who could easily work in some different environment. So social economy is also, can be an answer to this issue.
Follow-up question?
Digitalization often crashes with standard ways of organisation and patterns of working, which may cause risk of burnouts for our European workers. You did mention that previously. Will one of your priorities be the renewal of the EU Compass for Action on Mental Health, which special focus on mental health-related diseases? Thank you, Commissioner-elect.
I think I have to deal with the commissioner who is in charge also of health policy, so we have to coordinate that. But certainly this is an issue which we have to follow up. We cannot just stop here and say, well, there is no follow-up. So I will certainly have a look at that, and together with the commissioner in charge of health, we will do so. I have already mentioned that social partners are engaged in discussing mental diseases at the workplace, like the ones you mentioned, like burnouts and stress. And I think we have to adapt a bit our knowledge, but also the ways how we can prevent. Because in many of these issues, when you have to start to cure, it's already very late. I wouldn't say it's too late, but it's already very late. What we have to have is a strong prevention policy. When people start to have a problem, you have to act, not when the problem is there, fully there. And so this prevention policy has to be integrated into our overall health and safety approach. Prevention is key.
Madam Scheibe, your questions?
Bonjour, Monsieur le...
Good morning, Commissioner Designate. I was very pleased to hear you talk about the Uberization of our work. This affects all EU countries, and there's a huge trap here, is that employees are being presented as bogus self-employed to avoid social obligations, and yet we feel the effects. These workers have to obey the platforms. They have the right to punish them. They give them orders. They determine what they have to do. And the European Court of Justice of the European Union has set down certain conditions to determine whether an employee is an employee and not self-employed. Today, we have platforms that are being said, yes, directives are brilliant, but we're not concerned by it. We're not affected by this in any way. those riding bikes and delivering goods in Madrid or Paris, they aren't workers, they're partners. So my first question is, do you agree that these workers should be seen as salaried workers? And you also talked about a social conference on the subject. What should the goal of this social conference be? And can you commit to adopting a specific directive on platform workers? Thank you.
J'ai aussi vu cette émission.
Yes, I watched a very interesting program on a French channel on the situation pertaining to certain platform workers. I can assure you that it was an eye-opener because perhaps my eyes weren't sufficiently open. In my mission letter, there is a reference to the fact that I have to work on the issue of platform worker working conditions. And of course, this covers all the aspects that you touched upon. We do have to tackle these issues. At the moment, we also have to grapple with an ECJ ruling that covers the conditions that, if fulfilled, make a worker an employee and not self-employed. And we shouldn't leave it up to the courts, even the European Court of Justice, to define this. We have to clearly define what determines whether someone is an employee or self-employed. This is part and parcel of the definition that we have to work on and the work that we have to put in order to tackle the issue of platform workers. Now, if I knew exactly what I had to do in order to deal with this, I wouldn't have to convene a social conference in order to determine this. This is extremely complex. We know there are 1,000 ways of getting around this, and the documentary illustrates this very well. There are thousands of ways of getting around any possible definition. So we have to have clear definitions. We have to have rules that are clearly established for all employees and workers, whether they are salaried employees or whether they are self-employed. Because if everyone has the same rights, then maybe it won't be in companies' interest to play with words or tamper with concepts. It won't be in their interest because people will be able to choose their status and the status that they should have. Microphone, please. The speaker has no microphone. You talked about the fact that this issue perhaps could lead to clashes of competence with other colleagues. Mrs. Vestager will also be responsible for drawing up a directive on digital issues that could cover platform workers. So you surely understand our concern. If you look at this or you deal with this from a workers' rights point of view, that's one thing, but it's completely different. You look at it from a competition point of view. So, Commissioner Designate, my fear is that you might have this rare opportunity plucked out of your hands. And more specifically, will you commit so that the future directive on platform workers will be looked at from the angle of workers' rights rather than the angle of services and the internal market? Thank you. Well, I've read my mission letter carefully. I don't have the impression that I'm a poor commissioner that has no influence whatsoever. Those who know me well know that I fight very hard for what I believe are my powers and the work that I'm responsible for. But I did read what Commissioner Vestager said, and she said very important things. She wants a digital economy that serves people. So she has undertaken a very clear commitment. Now, from California to Europe, we're all firmly convinced that we can't look at the new digital economy purely from the angle of the market, companies, competitiveness. In fact, the most valuable capital that we have in the digital economy is not machines, but human beings. So to build a digital economy that is human-centered is our goal. I am sure that together with Commissioner Vestager, we will do this. Thank you.
Za politično skupino socialistov in socialnih demokratov so ključni dostojni pogoji za poslovanje.
Thank you. On behalf of the Social Democrats, we want to stress the importance of working conditions. This is why we support decent living income and social security number. All workers need access to social protection and, indeed, the right to engage in collective bargaining. That's not the case, sadly. You've talked a great deal about protecting workers on online digital platforms. How do you intend to protect their rights? How do you, which aspects do you think are the most important when it comes to choosing the right safeguards? And will you ensure that there's transparency when it comes to payments and posting of workers directives?
D'abord, la question de la...
Well, first of all, on your question relating to social protection. Social protection is obviously a key.
And so the adoption of the recommendation on social protection really is an important step in that. And there is also a mechanism how we can implement, how member states have to implement this recommendation. And I think we have really to organize a good follow-up in the implementation of this recommendation. This is an important element that the implementation is absolutely efficient and equitable. So this is my first answer. The second, I have to come back to what I said on the Labour Authority. We have created an instrument, and now we have to use it. We have social partners on board, we have the Commission on board, and we have member states on board. So we really have to make sure that this instrument becomes operational. And that's why I want it to become operational as soon as possible. So this is important for posting. This might be important also in the future for all kinds of other labor-related issues, including also safety issues, because very often posted workers are not those the best protected also in relation to safety and health. So this is also something we have really to look at. So implementation, it's not alone about legislation, it's about implementation. And here member states have a big responsibility. And we have to talk to member states. We have also take the good opportunity of the European semester, and a lot of recommendations are now in the area of social. So we have to use also the recommendation in the European semester to increase the awareness of member states to respect the rules and to have a good policies in all the issues you just mentioned.
Follow-up question?
Tudi moje dopolnilno vprašanje zadeva pravice delavcev in delovne pogoje.
Well, my next question also relates to the matter of workers' rights, working conditions, and labour rights. We need to adapt to changes. In 1994, a directive was adopted on workers' rights, employees' rights. Well, there are still many challenges that remain unresolved with regard to the directive. How do you intend to resolve the issue of sanctions and legal certainty, and as well as implementation in all the member states, and informing workers adequately?
That's a directive you're referring to about the committees in companies. There are some weak points in this directive. I think it was a big progress, but there are some weak points because it's a directive functioning on some voluntary basis. And the point is some apply it and some do not apply the directive, and those who apply the directive sometimes do not really apply the directive. So I think we have really to reflect on this measure, on this directive. I will invite social partners to enter this reflection and I'm not too optimistic, I tell you, but I think it's important that social partners talk about it. They have already talked about it, but they have really to analyze what are the weak points, what can we improve. Sanctions are good, but sanctions do not resolve all the problems, because if we increase the sanctions, what will be the consequence? Then even less companies will enter the application of the directive, because they see, I do not take the risk to be sanctioned, so I do not adopt it. So I think we have to have really an evaluation what results this directive has brought, and certainly there are also some positive results. What are the weaknesses of this? How can we assure a better implementation again of this directive? I think this Commission has proposed some measures, a handbook, for instance, on this, and this has been refused. So I think this is on our agenda. We will have a look at it, but I cannot say it will go in this direction or that. But it's an important directive, so we have to take this very seriously.
Madam Sparentag.
Thank you. In the EU, more people are homeless and citizens are struggling to afford a roof over their heads. Will you take the responsibility for an EU strategy on social housing as a part of your commitment to reduce poverty? And next to that, in my country, starters and lower middle income families can often not find appropriate housing on the private market. But the EU has forbidden the Netherlands to provide this group with social housing. This is the EU hindering actively a successful social policy. To truly deliver on social housing, will you push in the college to remove the restrictions imposed by the EU on member states' social housing policy to only target specific users?
Well, you know, I'm coming also from a country where there is really a housing problem. And the housing problem is now in many member states. Though the competence in this area is really with the member states, I think that Europe can really play a triggering role when we encourage first more investment in housing. We are about now to create a certain number of new investment tools, and when we talk about poverty, investing in housing is also a tool to reduce poverty, because people who are homeless, people who are in bad housing conditions, they do not come out of poverty, and especially their children cannot come out of poverty. So I think we have to discuss with the member states that social housing under fair conditions, and you mentioned the problem of competition, indeed, what we have really to analyze and to have a serious look at if these conditions are still adapted to the reality on the ground. But I think there is a necessity for promoting investment in housing in many places in Europe. Not all of them, in many places in Europe. So certainly in the limits of the competences of the Union, I will very much try to integrate this dimension into our fight against poverty and our commitment for inclusion.
Follow-up question.
Thank you for your answer. But will you actively take this responsibility for an EU strategy on social housing? You mentioned a lot that you find it very important for young people to have a fair start on the labor market, and I hope you agree that it's also very important for young people to have a fair start on the housing market.
Now, it's not only the Commissioner for Jobs and eventually Social Affairs who can do that. We have to do that with other commissioners. It's an economic issue. It's certainly a social issue. It's a financial issue. We have to sort out what kind of financial means we can mobilize in order to encourage investment in housing. So I'm part of a team. The Commission is not one commissioner deciding that's what we will do, but the Commission is also a college. It's a team. So if we can work, and I think there is really the intention of this Commission to do something in relation to the housing problem in many areas of Europe, linked to the situation of young people, linked to the situation of kids, linked of jobs. If you have no house, you won't find a job. So I will certainly be one of them pushing for solutions, given the limited competence the Union has, but also taking into account the financial means we can mobilize for at least pushing member states to be more, to do more in this very crucial and sensitive area.
Mr. Cañas.
No microphone for the speaker.
Estamos de acuerdo.
Mr. Schmit, this is going to be the parliament where we develop the social pillar. And that's going to be essential if we want to speed up European integration and achieve a Europe that is really works in the interest of its citizens. And I think we all agree on that. And the role of this social economy is key here. There's some 3 million companies and entities that are employing some 14 million and making up about 8% of the GDP. But if we want to have improvements in economic, social, and environmental side, we need a sustainable development model. And we're not seeing the equal acceptance in all the member states and the different legal systems. That's why we need a clear legal framework that's homogeneous right across the board. And can you commit to that?
Well, I can make you a confidence. You know, I'm a big fan of social economy. So I've been a minister of social economy. So I'm really believing in the important role of social economy already now. And certainly there is still more potential to develop social economy, especially given the challenges we have, environmental, social, poverty, exclusion. All these issues can be well tackled, sometimes better tackled if we have a strong social economy sector. So certainly not every country knows exactly the same model of social economy. So we have to respect the different cultures. Same thing then with a collective buy. We have to respect the different models which exist in the different countries. But I think there is a lot room for action together. And in 2011, Commissioner Barnier and Commissioner, I think, Andor and also Tajani, they had a social business conference, which really created a positive dynamic for social economy in Europe. So my idea would be with other commissioners, again, it's not only the Commissioner for Jobs who can be responsible and who can tackle this issue, with other commissioners to really replicate such initiative, to bring actors together and to have a plan to promote social economy in relation to the big challenges we have in our societies, and to use the tool of social economy, to give social economy. I've mentioned about the financial aspect, to promote the financial aspect. The jobs issue is very clear. So I think there is potential. We have to use it. The internal market is an important issue. Social economy should have the same rights on the internal market than any other enterprise. So I'm looking forward to work on that with other commissioners to make social economy even more solidly established in Europe and part of our social market economy. And that's also linked to social responsibility, which was mentioned by our colleague.
Follow-up question?
It's very difficult to get concrete answers. But I think it's important we need to move towards a homogenized framework that's the same everywhere. Now, one of the challenges we'll face in this Parliament, and I think you've shared some very interesting ideas that we can share in Renew Europe. I think the problem of youth unemployment, of course, in certain member states, the levels are just unacceptable. They're intolerable. And there, my question would be, do you feel that when there should be a reserved share out of funds, the 3% for youth unemployment, and do you think that the member states that are most badly affected have a 15% share allocated to them? Because I think it's a scourge that really affects us all, and it's now that we need the concrete measures to tackle that problem.
Just a brief response. You know, if we start, if we want to really harmonize exactly the status of what we call social economy, which has a very different name in Germany, for instance. When you talk about social economy in Germany, they do not understand what you mean. But they have also a very strong social economy sector. If we want to harmonize this, we will end up nowhere. But we can have a very practical, pragmatic approach on that. And mobilizing and creating some level playing field for all kinds of enterprises, associations, and so on, who consider themselves belonging to the social sector. That's just a compliment to your question. The second one is very important, that's youth unemployment. I think this is absolutely also, remains absolutely a priority on our agenda. I won't give you now a clear answer if it should 3% or 15%. First, you have to know exactly what can we do better, what can we do more, how can we use the existing tools we have. We have talked a lot about youth guarantee, but it's not only youth guarantee, it's education, it's training. All this have to come together. And certainly, the funds we have to dedicate to youth unemployment, we have specially to dedicate them there where youth unemployment remains a major problem. There where youth unemployment is very low, where they can tackle their problem more easily. But it's where the concentration of youth unemployment is high. There we have also to focus our resources.
Last question of today, Mr. Hetman.
Already.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You have talked at length about posting of workers, but I'd like to turn your attention to one issue and ask a very simple and short question. The directives oblige the member states to publish all information on the conditions of posting and remuneration of workers on one website. However, unfortunately, the practice shows that these websites often lack some information. What steps are you going to take to make sure that these websites really reflect the actual legal situation in the countries that receive posted workers? Thank you.
It's again the question of implementation. It's not enough to have good rules, to have good regulations. You have to make sure that what you have decided is also implemented. Now, I must say, I admit that I didn't know that. So I will certainly check if this is the case, if the information is not available, if the websites are not complete, if the information which has to be given, which has to be delivered, is not given. And if this is the case, well, we have to act. We have to make sure that those who are posting workers also give the right information. You know, posting is a positive thing. It's very often presented now as the worst imaginable thing. but it has to respect the rules. It has to be fair. It has to be fair to the posted country, to the posting country, but also to the workers. Not only those who are posted, but also those who are directly impacted by posting. And therefore, to make it fair, you have at least to have all the information on the conditions. And if this is the case, that all the information on this internet is not given, well, the Commission will certainly do something about it and enter into discussion that will be the case. But I have to check that. I must admit that I was not aware of that, but I'm not yet in the job, so give me a chance.
Follow-up question, please.
Tak, skorzystam.
Yes, I will use this opportunity to ask the very last question. When it comes to the implementation of the Posting of Workers Directive, what are you going to do with unproportionate administrative burden in some member states? How are you going to make sure that the freedom of movement and services will be fair and truly free in the context of the Posting of Workers Directive? Thank you.
I think I have already partly answered this issue. I think nobody wants to create impossible burden, administrative burden, because we all know if you are creating this kind of burdens, well, you have some second thought. And we do not want to have this kind of second thought. We want to have the administrative files which are absolutely needed, but not something which makes life impossible for enterprises, for people, for the posting and the posted country. This is not, should not be the intention. So what is important is that we have to evaluate what makes posting efficient, what makes posting fair, what are the information we need, how can this information be provided, what happens if you do not have, prior to the posting activity, the famous A1, what happens if you have it shortly after. All these very practical issues have to be evaluated. And on the basis of this evaluation, well, there has to be some adjustments, if the adjustments are needed. I think we have not created a system to make posting impossible. We have made a system which makes posting beneficial to everybody and especially acceptable to everybody. Because if we do not have rules, well, there is a very strong rejection. And we consider posting as part of the free service, providing services and free circulation. So we have to make sure that it is working properly and fairly. That we will do, and also on the level of administrative procedures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last 30 seconds you got as a bonus, Mr. Schmit. Didn't use my hammer. Thank you to all of you for your questions. Thank you very much for your answers. And now you will also have the chance to make a final statement for no longer than 5 minutes.
So you think, and after, well, so first I want to thank you for this very interesting, instructive, stimulating, critical discussion we had. I must say this is European democracy. And I think our member states, as we come from our member states, we had responsibilities in our member states. Well, I do not know many member states where such an exercise takes place. And we should really be proud of this democratic system. And I really congratulate our parliament, because I'm still a member of our parliament. I really congratulate our parliament for having introduced this debate, this exchange, because the job of a commissioner should be very strongly, very directly related to the work in your parliament. We are not those very far, even if it's very close, away from what happens here. I often hear, well, these commissioners, they are not elected, they are not. Well, I became a minister without being elected in my member state. Now I have been elected to our parliament, and I have been, or I will be judged by you, which doesn't happen in many, I think in no member state. So thank you very much for this very stimulating exercise. I liked a lot, and I cannot say that I suffered, but it was tough, and it has to be tough. Now, it's not because we had a good debate today that we should not have very frequently this kind of debates. And I will come back whenever you ask for, whenever I have the feeling to talk to you, to take your advice, to take your opinion, very diverse, very different, sometimes quite critical, I must say, but I think this is what makes our European politics lively and really democratic. So I take the commitment today to be often with you and to continue what we started today, if you allow me. Now, I think we have a common project, a big common project. Everywhere, everybody along his own ideas and ideals. We are not the same, otherwise there would be just one party here, which we do not like by no way. But what we have in common is to serve our people. It's to serve European citizens. It's to bring Europe again closer to the citizen. And our citizens, they have their daily life. They have their daily problems. And we have to deal with their daily problems. And many of the questions you asked me about minimum wage, about social protection, about poverty, about children, all that is part of the daily life of our citizens. So we have to make sure that our policies serve our citizens in their daily life. That after 5 years of this Commission, Europeans can say, well, there has been some real positive progress. There has been some important changes in my life thanks to Europe. That's the big promise of Europe. It's not just about peace, though peace remains a big and very important issue. But this shared prosperity, this idea that everybody has a right to be part, an equal right to be part of society, and to have equal opportunities. That's what makes Europe great. And I think we have to defend these values. Not just by words, I agree. We have to defend it day after day in our political action. And that's what we have to do together, the Commission, the Member States and the Council, certainly, but together with Parliament, because you are the voice of our citizens, and we have to listen to this voice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As a chair, I would also like to comment on a few things, make a few remarks, if you allow me to do so. First of all, it was very interesting for me, as this was my first hearing. And it was very interesting, year two. Yeah, we have something in common. It was very interesting for me to follow your questions that were tough, were quite critical, and it was very interesting that actually the social dimension of the portfolio was much more vivid today here at the hearing than the topic of creating jobs. That is basically the top topic of the portfolio of Mr. Schmit. But if we are talking about the social inclusion of socially excluded, like people from minorities or people with disabilities, I can't imagine a better inclusion than through the labor market. So I think we all know that we do have to focus on this
We have to focus on creating sustainable jobs for those ones who really need it, because right now they are excluded in so many member states within the European Union. And it is a luxury because there is a huge gap on the labor market, and we need these people to get rid of the gap on the labor market. I very much appreciate what you said, Mr. Schmit, that you will focus on data-based evidence discussion, that on impact assessment of our policies. I think this is very important because we've been talking about the social European Union for years now. And the truth is that 1/4 of the children living within the EU live in poverty. And that on our streets we have 70% more homeless people than we had 10 years ago. These are data. So something is not working as good as we imagined. And the last thing is that what we've heard, it's a very, very, very ambitious plan, full of topics that you want to open, that right now divide the member states rather than union the member states, because you want to open very sensitive topics. And my last remark would be that we should only promise what we can actually deliver, because the expectations of people within the European Union are huge. There is a huge rate of populism among politicians in various member states, basically in all member states. And I think that some of the plans you have might be misused if we don't deliver what we have promised. So thank you very much to all of you, especially to Mr. Schmit. Now, before I close the meeting, I would like to announce that a meeting of coordinators will be held in camera to evaluate the hearing right after this hearing, and that is from 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. in room ASP 1E2. And I also have to ask all of you for patience, because as you probably know, it's going not to be easy. And the evaluation process and the evaluation letter are confidential, so it won't be sending via email, discussed anything just within the closed room among coordinators. Our final judgment will be published by the Conference of Presidents after the conclusion of the last hearings. And now the meeting is closed.
Okay, thank you very much. And with your remarks, really, I can imagine 3 hours.
Yeah.